Hey guys, how's it going? So today I want to show you how to make this really cool electric lift desk with an epoxy river top that's going to be really unique and something different than anything I've made on the channel before. So I hope you guys really like it, and let's get at it. Before we get started, I want to talk about one of the sponsors for today's video, Autonomous. These guys are awesome. This is who I went through in getting the lift desk platform, and this is a really cool desk, and they offer a bunch of varieties and shapes and strengths, so you can build anything you want, or they make prefab kits that you can just put together, as well as have things like the ergo stool that you'll see later on in the video, chairs, and other office supplies. So go check them out, and I'll leave a link in the description below. Make sure to go give those guys some love. The first thing I noticed when starting to take everything out of the box was this is a really nice setup. It's all aluminum and steel. There's not very many plastic parts or anything like that, so it's nicely constructed, and honestly it's pretty easy to put together. The instructions are really good and tell you really well how to put it together, as well as all of the screws are self-centering, and you don't have to worry about things binding up or being out of alignment. It is just simply popping things together, following the instructions, and tightening down the screws. Now, these are Allen head screws, so you got to be a little careful not to strip them out, but that's not too big a deal. And following the instructions just made this thing a breeze. There was only a handful of parts that have to be put together, and the rest of the electronics are all plug and play, but that's something we won't have to deal with right now. Later in the video I'll show you about that. The desk is also adjustable. These rails that I'm putting in here actually can slide to whatever width you really need to be able to accommodate whatever size top you are going to be doing for your desk. And also the feet on these are really nice and wide, so putting on a wide top like I did for mine is something that's not a problem, and the frame can support the weight and the shifting and moving of the top with absolutely no problems. To make this a little more interesting and not just a plain Jane top, even though I was using some really cool looking wood, being this spalted magnolia, I wanted to do kind of an interesting design inside of the river, something I haven't seen too many people do. So I headed over to the CNC, and that brings me to the other sponsor for today's video, Bits and Bits. Go check these guys out. If you're in need of any kind of CNC or router bits, or even some drill bits, these guys carry them all, and they have a proprietary Astra coating that makes the bits hold their edge longer and cut better. I can tell you from experience, it works awesome. I love these bits. I've been using bits from these guys for a long time now, and have put the bits I've got through them through their paces, so make sure to go check them out. I'll leave links down in the description, and you can go get some for yourself and see how well they cut. One great thing about using the CNC to create these designs that was going to go inside of the river of the desktop is that I don't have as much wasted material. I know a lot of people have seen the hexagon or octagon style tables where they just cut solid plugs and then lay them out in a symmetrical pattern and then fill the voids with epoxy. I did not want to do that. I decided to do these kind of rings with plugs also, and wasn't quite sure how the layout was going to work, but using the CNC to do this, I was able to use a board that otherwise would have only got me around 8 to 10 plugs, but in this case got me somewhere around 22 or 20 out of one board that was only 48 inches long. Each cut got me anywhere between 2 and 4 rings and or plugs, and just because of how I nested them together. And like I said, if it wasn't for this i2R8 CNC, I wouldn't been able to do that. I would have only got a handful of plugs out of the board, and the tabletop would have not looked anything like I really had pictured in my head. So a CNC is a great way to do things like this. I'll leave links down to the i2R. Go check it out. After I got that cut out and got those ready, I moved on to preparing the boards that were going to be the main visual of the table besides the river. I was going to be using the spalted magnolia, which is a really pretty wood with all this crazy spalting and coloring through it. And I first had to cut them to length. I knew what length I wanted my desk to be. It was going to be somewhere around 51 inches long. From there, I knew I had to build the mold to that size, and I would need the boards at a specific size to fit within that. Now, I also did cut the boards to size and make my mold a little bit larger than that in the end, just thinking I was going to cut off some of the epoxy on the ends. But as you'll see later, that wound up not being something I had to do, as it released really clean from the tape inside the mold and didn't need to be cut down or cleaned up. Before putting the boards in the mold though, with this being a live edge river, you need to make sure to remove all the debris from the live edge as well. Some people forget to do this, and then you wind up with a bunch of debris inside your epoxy, or the epoxy might not adhere right to the edge of the board that's within the river. So now it was on to prepping the mold. Now I want to apologize, my camera messed up and I lost a bunch of footage, which was me preparing and putting a couple of sides on the mold. But pretty much I used packing tape to stop the epoxy from adhering to the inside of the mold. Cover the entirety of the inside of the mold with packing tape. Make sure there's no gaps and all the overlays are super smooth, and you won't have any problems with the epoxy releasing. Also, while you're putting the mold together, I use silicone inside of the seams and then nail the ends with a nail gun.
Nailed it!
With the mold together, I then apply a thin bead of silicone to all the interior seams inside the mold just to ensure there won't be any leaks. I also take each of the boards that will be inside the mold and lay masking tape down and apply a bead of silicone on the masking tape all the way around the edge of each board. This will ensure epoxy doesn't go underneath the board and cause any problems there, and it'll make cleanup of the bottom much easier. Now I moved on to the fun part, which was more challenging than I ever thought it would be, and that was figuring out what design I wanted these octagon plugs and rings to be in. I went through several different patterns, and some I liked, some I didn't, and went back and forth debating on how I wanted them to lay out before finally coming to this overall layout of them just kind of mixed together. And then I was able to place them permanently into the mold. Using hot glue, I added a constant bead around the edge of each of the rings and just a couple of dabs on each of the plugs to hold them in place. And also the rings would need to be sealed on the bottom to allow me to mix different colors inside the rings without it bleeding out. With the mold pretty much ready, I got it in position and made sure it was level on both sides. That way the epoxy would lay out flat inside the mold and wouldn't pull up in one end. To figure out how much epoxy I would need, I have this very simple way of doing it. It's how most people do. You take multiple measurements along any opening and use the average width, and then multiply that by the length and the depth that you would like the epoxy to be, and that will give you the area of the river. You then take that area and divide it by 144, and that will give you the board feet amount of epoxy you will need to pour. Now, depending on what epoxy you're using, it has different coverages due to different viscosities. So one size does not fit all. Just check with what epoxy you're using to figure out how much you would need. I wound up needing around 2.5 gallons of the thick set Total Boat epoxy. This is their slow setting epoxy that's made for deeper pours like this. And I was going with a 2-color pattern, a green and then also a black with a tinted green pearl. I thought they would look really cool as they mix together and kind of blend in the center, but you'll see what I mean about that later on. While mixing your epoxy, if you're using a drill, make sure to not go crazy with your speeds. You'll get a bunch of air in there and it can be a little bit difficult to get out. Now, I want to apologize for the shaky camera on this. I had a couple of family members helping me do this and they have never poured a deeper tabletop or anything like that before. So I was kind of having to give some instruction as I was filming. But one catch here is that you don't want to just flood the two colors massively together if you're trying to get a specific mix in the center. You can do that from one end or the other, but if you have people that haven't done pours before and one pours much faster than the other, the colors won't meet in the middle. So I like to go from the middle of the tabletop and work my way out, so I make sure there's an easier blend. From there, I can mix the two colors as I would like and get the pattern a little more laid out that way. Also, the darker colors will overtake a brighter color like that pretty easily, so I didn't want to go crazy with the blacker color. I then started filling the rings in the center. On the ends with the more black, I wanted the contrasting bright green, and on the ends with the bright green, there would be more of the contrasting blacker color. In the center rings, though, I did add a bit more of the green and black to each other to get a nice mix. Another thing you're going to notice is that I did not fill all the way up to the top edge of the board. This was by design on a attempt to try to give it a bit of a 3D look once the tabletop was applied, because this would give it this really cool deep look, almost like the walls of a canyon going down into a river. Now after that, I waited a few hours till the epoxy was starting to kind of gel up, and then I could use a piece of wire or a small stir stick and add in the pattern to the epoxy. You can't really do this right off because the liquid will just go back out and the pearlescence will sink, but if you wait till it's a bit gelled up, it will hold the pattern a little better. With the pattern stirred in, I then let the deep set epoxy completely harden before moving on to applying the first coat of the tabletop epoxy from Total Boat. Now I was going to be doing multiple coats of this as it was going to be pretty thick, but this was going to give this a really cool 3D looking pattern to where the wood and the octagons in the center would actually cast shadows around themselves and not look like they were just flat and seamless. So I did multiple pours of this, and in between each pour, made sure to use a heat gun to get all of the air bubbles out and get a crystal clear finish.
And now, we wait.
You know, the waiting game sucks.
Get back to work.
With the epoxy completely cured, I can start taking it out of the mold. As you can see, it releases extremely easy from the packing tape. The epoxy doesn't stick at all, and the sides were really smooth. I thought I was going to need to cut them down to remove imperfections, but I didn't need to. Also, I had to remove the screws from the underside as I had screwed the boards down to the bottom of the mold just to keep them a little better in place and ensure not very much epoxy at all could get underneath them. And it made it to where the bottom of the desktop had very little cleanup that needed to be done, so I honestly didn't even show it. After that, I was able to move on and start routing the top of the tabletop. I was using a round over bit from Bits and Bits with their Astra coating, and it plowed through this stuff and gave a super smooth finish to the edge that would just need to be polished up later on. After all the corners were rounded over, it was on to everyone's favorite pastime, sanding. So I started with a 600 grit on the orbital sander and was using water to wet sand all of the surfaces. I then moved up to an 800 and then 1500 on the orbital Before moving on and starting to hand sand, because I wanted to go up to a really high grit, I was using a sanding block to make sure I stayed perfectly flat, and then moved on to 2000, 4000, and then 12,000 grit. After that, I was able to start polishing this. Now, I'm using just regular old turtle wax car polish. It does exactly what you need it to do, which is to remove the micro scratches that you create when you get to those really high grit sandpapers. To do this, you use a polishing wheel or buffing wheel, and you add a good bit of pressure in the beginning. And as you start seeing more and more of a shine come to the top, you then start doing less and less pressure and higher speeds on your buffer, and you will see this mirror-like finish start to appear. One thing I really would like to note as well is if you have never done this before, you should know it is really messy. I highly suggest an apron and make sure you wear eye protection, because this thing throws all kinds of dust up and lint from the buffing wheel, as well as the compound kind of gets flung around a good bit. Buffing out a tabletop like this is one of my favorite processes, even though it's kind of physical, but you get to see this top go from a murky, cloudy, sanded surface to this beautiful, crystal clear, soft glass, and it's really cool to watch. After buffing, wipe down all the residue, and then you can install the top onto your autonomous base. To do this, you simply center the top and use the supplied screws that come in the kit to hold down the top. There's also some isolators that are put underneath the top to stop any vibrations. Hooking up the control box is, as I said before, simply plug and play and you're ready to go. Put the box underneath the table and attach it to the tabletop using the supplied screws, and also the clips that come in the kit to help route the wiring and keep it out of the way. The final step is to mount the controller that mounts to the front of your desk to control the height of your desk. And this is done with the supplied screws just like with the box, and you're good to go.
There's Emerald City. Oh, we're almost there at last, at last. It's beautiful, isn't it? Just like I knew it would be. He really must be a wonderful wizard to live in a city like that.
Oh, come on then. What are we waiting for?
Nothing. Let's hurry.
Yes, let's run.
Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I had an absolute blast making this desk. I'm thinking about making a few of them as a limited run to be custom ordered. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can get a hold of me if that is something you actually want to look into. Also, I want to thank Autonomous and Bits and Bits for sponsoring today's video. Links are in the description. Go check those guys out. And if you want to get into making stuff like this yourself, also check out i2rcnc.com. i2r is awesome. I have the i2r8, and if you guys use the link in the description below, you can get up to $200 off of the i2r8, and it's an awesome machine. So I hope you guys have enjoyed everything. Hit the subscribe button, the notification bell. YouTube also now has a rating system, so if you like these videos, make sure to give them 5 stars so you can see more of them and I can continue growing and bringing cool projects to you guys. So like always, I hope you've enjoyed it. I had a blast, and I'll see you on the next one.